The confirmation hearings have started for Amy Coney Barrett. Many progressives are understandably horrified by Trump adding another hardcore conservative justice to an already conservative court. With a 6-3 right-wing majority, Biden would have to get 2 unexpected vacancies to tip things back in a liberal direction. Those of us with politics to the left of liberalism worry about what the court that Trump has been so busy shaping would do if a future Bernie Sanders-style governing majority tried to enact the kind of legislation that we would want. An increasingly popular view on the left is that the solution is court packing, whereby Biden or some other future Democratic president would appoint more liberal justices despite all 9 usual seats having already been filled. But this still takes for granted that we should accept the basic framework of an appointed super legislature empowered to rewrite the laws passed by Congress. I'm going to argue that the left should reject that idea. The appointment of Amy Coney Barrett is enough of a 4-alarm crisis to make a lot of progressives rethink their previous relatively conservative impulses about how to think about the institution of the Supreme Court. Back when Republicans were blocking Obama's nomination of Merrick Garland to replace Antonin Scalia, there was a lot of talk of Garland's Supreme Court seat being stolen. That was silly. Imagine that Antonin Scalia had managed to hold on to his wretched life for exactly 4 more years to the day, so that as much time separated his passing from the 2020 election as had actually separated his passing from the 2016 election. Imagine also, and I know this part is more of a stretch, that Senate Democrats in this world had used a series of parliamentary tricks to block the appointment for long enough that Biden, rather than Trump, could appoint his successor. Remember, in this world that I'm describing, there would be no Merrick Garland precedent to use to accuse the Republicans of hypocrisy when they had a problem with any of this. Even so, wouldn't it be a good thing if they did stop the Trump appointee from being confirmed? Aren't abortion rights and collective bargaining rights and everything else threatened by a conservative Supreme Court majority more important than the informal traditional norm that whoever a president appoints, they at least get hearings and an up or down vote? At this point, I think a lot of Democrats are probably ready to concede that argument. In fact, I'm increasingly seeing progressives and leftists questioning the informal traditional norm that the number of Supreme Court seats be held at 9. To stop the 6-3 conservative majority we're about to get from blocking future reformist legislation, these progressives are willing to support a court packing scheme like the one FDR briefly floated when conservative Supreme Court justices were getting in the way of the New Deal. But why not take another step and question the informal traditional norm that we let the Supreme Court void laws passed by Congress in the first place? Just as it doesn't specify the number of justices, just as it doesn't specify that the Senate has some sort of duty to hold confirmation hearings on justices appointed by presidents it doesn't like, the Constitution nowhere even hints that the court would have the power of judicial review. This is a power that the Supreme Court simply asserted for itself in Marbury versus Madison. High courts don't have that power in most Western democracies. The usual liberal argument in favor of judicial review is that we need it to protect the rights of unpopular minorities. So, for example, they worry that homophobic or transphobic majorities might elect legislatures who are socially conservative and would pass anti-gay or anti-trans laws. And then when that happened, all of those of us on the left will be happy that we have the Supreme Court to stop those laws from being enacted. But there are at least 3 problems with this as a general argument for judicial review. The first is that things will only work the way that liberals think they will in this scenario if the Supreme Court justices who have a majority at that point have socially liberal views. We only need to look at any of the numerous cases where all the liberals on the court go one way and all the conservatives go the other way. You just need to read any of the rulings or any of the dissents to see that on any of these legally controversial issues, you can make a sophisticated-looking constitutional argument in either direction. In fact, people always do, but which one people embrace is largely going to be a function of their usual views. So, for example, a liberal integrationist court will give you Brown versus Board, but a conservative pro-slavery court will give you Dred Scott. Empowering the court as an unelected super legislature means that, and maybe this hasn't always been true, but it's certainly true now, that if presidents know perfectly well what their appointees think about social issues, liberal presidents will appoint justices likely to intervene to protect vulnerable minorities in social issues cases, and conservative presidents will appoint justices likely to intervene in exactly the opposite direction on the very same cases. The effect isn't to limit legislation by some standard that by its very nature is guaranteed to be socially liberal, but just to impose the social views of previous presidents on the review of later legislation. That's it. That's the whole thing. As Samuel Moyn often points out, people with this picture of how the Supreme Court works are mostly thinking of the Warren Court and ignoring far too much of how the Supreme Court has acted before and since, and just defining everything that's happened since then that doesn't fit that picture as an aberration from the Warren Court standard. But that's just not historically accurate, which brings us to the second problem for this liberal argument, which is that as a matter of historical fact, the unpopular minority that the Supreme Court is most likely to intervene to protect is the rich. They do this all the time. Remember the context in which FDR was talking about court packing in the 1930s. If a future president, Rashida Tlaib, signs Medicare for All into law, you'd better believe that conservative Supreme Court justices will find some sort of argument to justify saying that it's unconstitutional. Maybe some neoliberal Democrat Supreme Court justices also. I'm extremely confident about their creativity and their ability to fulfill their role as the American Capitalism Guardianship Council. Just as with social issues, the effect of empowering these 9 people, or 18 people, or 180, or whatever we're talking about in some court packing scheme, to rewrite democratically enacted legislation is to impose the economic views of previous presidents on the review of future legislation. If a social democratic majority, never mind a radically socialist one, ever takes power in America, that means that playing the usual game of appointing justices one at a time as vacancies come up mean that we'd have to hold on to power for decades before implementing serious reforms. Good luck with that. Of course, we could pack the court again then, but that brings me to the third problem with the liberal argument. Even if you prioritize the hope of socially liberal Supreme Court decisions over the inevitability of economically reactionary ones, you can hope for the court to play the stable, institutional, liberal safeguard role, or you can exercise the nuclear option of packing it. You can't do both, since packing obviously invites counter-packing the second the Republicans regain power, and then you have the same problem next time Democrats regain power, as short of somehow getting so much consensus that you're able to get through a constitutional amendment specifying the number of justices, then appointing a bunch of liberals and getting the Republicans to agree to hold it there, and really good luck with that one. Packing is just an awkward roundabout way of de facto abolishing judicial review. What these 3 problems point us to is one big underlying fact, and that's that the court is fundamentally a reactive institution that tends to enshrine the balance of power already present in society. To the extent that the court doesn't just preserve the preferences of previous administrations like an awful disease-carrying insect trapped in amber, that's because court majorities are influenced by whatever's going on in society as a whole. Marriage equality wasn't passed until after popular opinion on gay rights had already changed. It's no coincidence that the progressive Warren Court existed at the same time that union density was the highest it's ever been in this country. In the very likely event that Biden becomes president, and the significantly less likely event that he finds his spine and packs the court, our best hope for the kind of centrist liberal justices Biden is likely to appoint, being friendly to future social democratic legislation, is building a revitalized labor movement that can change the balance of forces on the ground, and thus the considerations and the climate in which they'll be making decisions. So, best case scenario, such a court wouldn't be too much of a hindrance to a movement that might achieve real change. At worst, it will continue to use its power of judicial review to block further progress. If we're serious about ever having a chance of carrying out socialist policies in this country, we need to start thinking about abolishing that power entirely.